Hi, welcome to biology. This is our very first slideshow for Brookings Biology, and we're going to be talking about things that you read about in Chapter 1. Basically, what is science? And more specifically, what is biology? And then what are some of the characteristics of living things? That's what we're going to be studying about this year in this class. If you look at science in general and what scientists do, we have to think about science as a method of looking at the world, as an organized method of looking at things that we see and trying to make sense of things. Scientists use evidence to try and explain things that they see happen. If you've spent any time with young children, you know they spend a lot of time asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do trees turn color in the fall? Why do bugs do this? Why? And they're curious about the things they see happening in their world. And scientists do the same thing. They see something happen and they want to understand what's going on. So what scientists do is collect evidence. They do experiments, they collect data, and they try and organize that information into a framework that helps us make sense of what we see and see things happen in our world. What we have to remember is science only deals with what we call the natural world. We're not talking about supernatural. If you watch those crazy shows on TV with the Ghostbusters and those kinds of things, that's not something that science deals with. We need to focus on what we call the natural world, things that we can study, things that we can see happen. What scientists do is look for patterns and connections because that helps us make sense of the information that we know. If we're just memorizing random facts, it gets pretty complicated. And if you think about it, you started doing this as a very young child. Most of us watched Sesame Street when you were younger. And one of the things they ask you to do on Sesame Street is play that game. 3 of these things go together and one of them is different. And you had to look at pictures of objects and look for patterns. Which ones are alike and which one is different? These things are all red and this thing is yellow. These are all round shapes and this one has a square shape. We start doing that at a very young age, and the reason is that it helps us to make sense and understand what's going on in the world. If I ask you to close your eyes for a minute and think about a bird. Got one? Probably most of you didn't think of the exact same bird. Maybe some of you thought of an eagle or a bird that you saw in your yard, like a cardinal or a blue jay or a robin. But if you think about it, and if I ask you to come up with what are some characteristics that birds have in common, probably you would say they have feathers, they have wings. And so even though we maybe think of different kinds of birds, we can kind of make sense, and you know what I'm talking about when I say the word bird, because there's a connection between that, the characteristics that birds have, all birds have. So what scientists do is try to come up with explanations that can be tested by doing an experiment. And so we see something happen and we make a hypothesis about what we think is going on, and then we do an experiment to try and collect data, collect evidence to explain that thing that we see happening. What we have to remember, though, is science is not just facts. Sometimes we think about science as just, I have to memorize these vocab words or memorize these ideas. But science is more than that. Science is not just memorizing information. It's more of a way of knowing or thinking about things and making those connections. Because we're always learning new things, and kind of what we think about as facts sometimes change. A long time ago, humans thought that if you went out far enough in a boat, you would fall off the edge of the earth. The fact at that time was that the earth was flat. And we know that's not true now. And how do we know? Because our experience has changed. Our technology has changed. We have new tools and ways of looking at things and collecting evidence. And now we have satellites. We've been up in space in rockets. And we can look back at the earth and have a view that those early people didn't have. And so our fact now is not that the earth is flat, but that the earth is round. So even though the facts change, if you think about science as a way of knowing things, it makes more sense in helping us to understand the world that we live in. Understanding science is a pretty important thing, and most of you probably aren't going to go on to become scientists. But think about all the things that we hear about, we see about, we deal with in the real world. And having an understanding about science is important for future generations because we need to have an understanding of science, and especially biology, to make intelligent choices about all kinds of issues. We see science in the news every day. So even though you're not going to go on to become a scientist, knowing some biology makes sense. Okay, so what is biology? Biology is the science of life. The ending ology on the end of a word means study of. Ology and biology, bio, means life, living things. Study of living things. And that's what we're going to study this year in this class. We're going to look at you are a living thing. The reason we're doing this is to have an understanding about what's going on inside of you and the world that we live in. Think of all the other living things that share our planet. Animals, plants, bacteria, all kinds of different organisms. And we're going to study those and learn about those connections between organisms and what's going on inside them. There's a place now, I want you to stop the video, put pause, and go back to the website. And next to where you started your slideshow, there is a little place where you can watch these two videos. It's Alive, part 1 and part 2. And when you've done that, come back to the PowerPoint and finish watching this video. Welcome back. I'm glad that you watched the video, and what you saw in the video was some characteristics of living things. What characteristics do all living things have in common? And so we're going to make a list. Characteristics of living things. All living things are made of cells. We're going to talk more about each one of these. All living things reproduce. If we didn't reproduce, we would pretty soon run out of the living things on our planet. We have to keep making more lions and more people and more bacteria. All living things have a same shared, that's what universal means, everywhere. They all have the same genetic code. They're talking the same language. All living things grow and develop. You started as a single cell. That sperm and egg got together to make that very first cell, and you went from a very small, tiny cell that you need a microscope to see to a huge, giant person that's 5 or 6 feet tall. All living things have to obtain and use material and energy from the outside world. You saw in the video all those shun words: digestion, respiration, excretion. They all have to do with obtaining the materials and energy that we use and helping them, using them to help maintain our bodies. Living things respond to their environment. Very important one. Living things maintain a stable internal environment. Maintain a stable internal environment. They like to keep things nice and steady. And the last characteristic, as a group, not individual organisms, but as a group, living things change over time. We're going to go on to look at each of those things, and we're going to put some vocab words on those ideas so we can talk about them, because we need to have some words or labels to talk about things. So very first one, we said all living things are made of cells, and the cell is the basic unit of life. It's the smallest little piece that shows those characteristics of living things. If you break a cell apart and let the insides out, it no longer is living. So cell is the smallest little piece of something that shows those characteristics. Okay, in the video you saw some vocab words flash on the screen that talked about and had to do with cells. Cells, some organisms are what we call unicellular. And here's a good place to talk about science vocab words. A lot of science vocab words seem pretty big and complicated, and they're not words we use every day. But if you look at the pieces and break them apart, it can help you to understand what the word means. We know what cell means, and uni, we use that prefix in a lot of other words. Think unit in math, a little piece that you measure with. Or unicycle, bike with one wheel. Uni means one. So unicellular organisms are made of only one cell. They're only one cell big. That's pretty tiny, and you probably need a microscope to see them. An example would be bacterial cells. They are very, very small, and a bacteria is an organism, a living thing that's only one cell big. Multicellular organisms, multi means many, multiple, think multiple, multiply. Multicellular organisms may start as one cell. You are multicellular, you have lots of cells, you started as one cell, but as adults, their bodies are made of many cells, many multi. Example would be a human or a tree. These are living things that are made, your body is made out of billions of cells. All living things reproduce, and they do it in two different ways, and some organisms can do both ways. Sexual reproduction is one that you're familiar with. That's what we do. In sexual reproduction, we're combining the genetic material, DNA, from two parents. Dad donates DNA in the sperm, mom donates DNA in the egg, and those two get together to make an offspring. Both parents contribute DNA. So sperm plus an egg, you get a baby. And anytime you have sperm and egg making a baby, you are dealing with sexual reproduction. Seen in animals, seen in some plants. We don't often think of plants as having sex, but plants do. Plants have flowers, those are their sexual reproducing organs. And flowers make pollen, that's the male part, that's the sperm part. And the middle part of the flower is where the egg is. And when bees carry pollen from one flower to another, they're helping the plant do sexual reproduction. They're moving pollen, the male part, the sperm, from one flower to the next flower to fertilize the egg and make a seed. That's a baby plant. The other kind of reproduction is called asexual. A means not or without, no sex. It's making a new organism, but we're using the genetic material, the DNA, from only one parent. An example is this little worm. It's called a flatworm. It's kind of a worm. They live in ponds and streams in South Dakota. You may see them if you go swimming or fishing. They kind of look like leeches, but they're not bloodsuckers. They are scavengers. They're called planaria. They look like little worms with flat heads. And they can reproduce asexually. If you take a planaria worm and cut it in half, the head grows a new tail, the tail grows a new head, and you get two worms. But because the pieces come from the same worm, they are genetically identical. It's like a clone. Some plants do that. If you've ever seen a spider plant, you can take those little spiders off the plant and pot them in a new plant, and you get a new whole plant. That would be asexual reproduction. We said all living things share a universal genetic code. Hereditary material is DNA in all cells. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Seems like a big word, complicated word, and if you want, we're going to just say DNA, but that's what the DNA stands for. D for deoxy, D-E-O-X-Y-R-I-B-O, deoxyribo, that's the sugar that's in there. Nucleic is the N, acid is the A, nucleic acid. If you look at a little piece of DNA that has instructions that tell the cell to do something, usually making a protein that has a function in the cell, that little piece of DNA that tells a cell how to do something is called a gene. And we're going to look at genes and we're going to look at DNA this year and see how that whole process works. We said all living things grow and develop. If you're a small cell, a single-celled organism, you grow bigger by just making your cell bigger, increasing your size. Bacteria do that. Even though they're very small to begin with, they can grow a little bit bigger. But there's a limit to how big you can get, and if you want to become a big organism, a big size organism, a multicellular organism, they grow in two ways. The cells can increase in size. You can make the cells a little bit bigger, but if you want to get really big, the way you do it is to make more cells, become multicellular. Increase not only cell size, but increase the cell number. Multicellular organisms don't just have many cells, lots of cells. You have billions of cells in your body. But those cells are different kinds of cells, and they do different kinds of jobs. They have different functions in your body. So you don't just have lots of cells that are all alike. You have skin cells, bone cells, nerve cells, muscle cells, blood cells, all those different kinds of cells doing different jobs in your body. That's kind of the cool thing about being multicellular. If you're a one-celled organism, that cell has to do everything, because that's all you have is your one cell. But if you become multicellular, you can start having cells specialize and do different kinds of jobs to help you do different things. That process of changing from that embryonic stem cell, that cell that I could become anything cell, into different looking adult cells that are doing different jobs. Those stem cells can change into a nerve cell and become part of your nervous system, your brain. It can become a blood cell and fight diseases. It can become a muscle cell. Those embryonic, I can be anything cells change to become different. And that vocab word for that is differentiation. Look at the word. It says right at the beginning, different. It's how cells become different to do different jobs. If you look at the cells in your body, they actually look different. And that's because their shape helps them do the job that they have. This is a really important idea. All cells have the same DNA. All cells have the same DNA. So a muscle cell has the code, has the genes inside to tell it how to do brain stuff, and how to do blood stuff, and how to do bone stuff. But they don't use those genes. What makes cells different, what makes a blood cell different from a bone cell or a nerve cell different from a muscle cell, is which of those genes they turn on and which of those genes they turn off. So even though all the genes are there, they don't use all the genes. Muscle cells turn off the brain genes and turn off the blood cell genes and turn off the bone genes and turn on genes that they need to become muscle cells and do their job as a muscle cell. It's kind of like when you go to the library and you have a whole library full of books, but I like reading mystery books. So when I go to the library, that's the first section that I head to. And I don't read all the books in the library. I only read the ones that are important to me, the mystery books. And that's kind of what a cell does. Even though it has all the code, all the library, the information to do all the jobs, it really is just reading and using those genes that help it to do its own specific job, like be a muscle cell or a nerve cell. We said all living things take in material and use energy. They need that in order to do their other thing that they do, which is grow and develop. Organisms need a constant supply of building materials, building blocks, and energy. So when a sheep is eating lunch, the sheep is taking those food molecules and the energy that's in the food and using it to make more sheep, to make its body to have the energy it needs to run and do all the things that sheep do. And living things get their energy and take in their materials in a little different way depending on what kind of organism they are. You learned this word before, I know, in middle school, autotrophs. Troph has to do with the way you get your food, and autotrophs can do it by themselves. Think automatic. They use energy from sunlight or chemicals to make their own food. We also call them producers because they can produce their own food using sunlight Example is green plants. They use photosynthesis to turn sunlight energy into glucose. Glucose is a sugar, and that's the food that most living things burn for energy. The other way organisms get their energy that they need are called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, or consumers, get their energy by eating, consuming, taking material from other organisms. Example would be animals, and that includes you. We are heterotrophs. We can't lay in the sun and make our own food like a green plant can. We have to get food energy by eating things. Most bacteria are heterotrophs. There are a few that can do photosynthesis, like a green plant. Okay, vocab word. All of those chemical reactions that are happening inside your body to obtain the food that you eat, break it down, use those materials that come from the food, the building blocks to build your body, getting energy from your food, all those chemical reactions that either build up or break down the materials as you go through life. The vocab word for that is metabolism. Metabolism is all the chemistry that's happening in your body right now. We said all living things respond to their environment. The signal that you respond to is called a stimulus. Stimulus is a signal that you get. When you are driving your car and you come up to a stoplight and you see yellow, that's a stimulus. What does it tell you to do? What's your response? Don't say go faster. Yellow is a stimulus that tells you the light's going to be turning red. You slow down and get ready to stop. Think about where we get our stimulus from. Stimulus can be an external stimulus coming from outside of our body. Example, when you grab onto something that's hot, you feel the signal that says, ouch, move your hand, get it off that hot thing. That's an outside stimulus. When a seed senses that it's in a place where the ground is warm enough and there's water enough and the sunlight is shining, the roots respond to gravity and grow downward, and the leaves grow upward, and the little seed sprouts, and we start to make a plant. It's responding to the signals that it gets from the environment, telling this is a place and a time that you should start to grow. Stimulus can also be an internal stimulus. When your blood sugar gets low and you're sitting in class and you're feeling hungry, it's because your body is responding to that low blood sugar stimulus. It's telling you, go eat something, go get some food. You need some more lunch. Cells work to maintain stable internal conditions. That was one of the things on our list. And that vocab word that goes with that idea is homeostasis. Keep it the same. If the temperature changes too much, if the water amount changes too much, nutrients, acidity, if we get too far away from that stable internal condition, the cell can actually get sick and die. Homeostasis involves internal signals. Internal, we call it feedback. Your body is always checking, how are things going? Do I have enough sugar? Am I too hot? Am I too cold? And your body responds to those signals by doing something to help maintain stable internal conditions. If you get too cold, you start shivering. Moving those muscles makes heat to help you warm up again. If you get too hot, we start sweating to cool off. And your body is trying to maintain your body temperature, maintain stable internal conditions. If you go to the 7-Eleven or the Shell station and buy a couple of those big giant big gulp sodas and you drink those, the very next place you have to go is to the bathroom. You take in extra water. Basically, that's what pop is sugar water. And your body's response is, hey, I need to maintain my water level, maintain my sugar level. And so what do? The way you get rid of excess water is you go to the bathroom. Maintaining your water level, maintaining your balance of water and ions in your body is called osmoregulation. It's a kind of homeostasis. The last thing we said is all living things as a group, not as an individual, but as a group, change over time. And the vocab word that goes with that is evolution. And we're going to talk more about evolution later on this year. But what evolution does, change over time. We can see that in the fossil record, how organisms have changed over time. It allows for survival of a species. As the world changes, the environment changes, organisms, populations in that place have to change with it. And we're going to talk about how that works and study about a little bit about evolution later on in the semester. So that is the end of our slideshow. Those are the characteristics of living things, and thanks for watching.